Last almost 2 weeks now, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia has been hogging the limelight on social media, on print media, and electronic media. But what is disturbing is that the most of the story or narrative which is existing in the media is a Western narrative, and it's a biased narrative. It's not a very objective and practical narrative. It's a very biased narrative which is being peddled on the media, and the sad part is the Indian media also is towing the same line. Now this narrative which is being peddled all over the Western media is that Russia is the monster and Ukraine is the holy cow, which is absolutely not correct. Actually, neither Russia is a monster nor Ukraine is a holy cow. We need to have the right geopolitical perspective and security perspective of the countries to appreciate it. And most of the people in the world, whether in India or outside India, don't have a, or everybody doesn't have a geopolitical and security perspective about the countries as such. So my today's this video will be to bring out three things. Rather, I will cover the this topic of conflict between Ukraine and Russia in three parts. First is the what is the background and who is responsible for this conflict, and what is the finally the solution for overcoming this conflict. Now, coming to the background is I'll try to explain to the audience, whether Indian audience or Western audience, with one example each. Although this example may not be a perfect example to bring out the background, but it will help people who are not aware about the socio-political or geopolitical or security situation of a country to appreciate it better. Imagine a situation that the border states of India were independent for decades, and suddenly one of the border states, say Rajasthan or Jammu and Kashmir or Punjab, they decide and they say, we will join Pakistan. Now, will the Indian government allow that? The Indian government will say, you want to be independent, you remain independent, but don't do that, because the moment you do that, you are bringing Pakistan close to my border, which is against my security concerns, and I will not allow that to happen. Now, taking that same example to the western side of the globe, imagine if USA is one of the coastal states, say California, after being independent for years together, suddenly decides, okay, I will join Russia, Russian group. Now, will USA allow that? Again, same answer or same thing USA will tell California. You want to be independent, you remain independent, nobody has a problem with that. But you cannot bring Russians to our border. It is against our security, and our security is hampered with that, is threatened with that. Now, same was the case here. Russia was telling Ukraine, the new government of Ukraine had been pursuing the objective of joining NATO. Russia has been telling the current government in Ukraine, please don't do that, because that is against our security concerns. Because Ukraine is not a small country, it has shares almost more than 2,000 kilometer border with Russia, and if it joins NATO, then the US and NATO missiles will be dotted all over the 2,000 kilometer border of Russia. How can Russia allow that? Russia will never allow that. So this is the background of the problem. Now, coming to who's responsible for it, I think the Western world is responsible for it. USA and the Western countries are responsible for it, and in turn, the president of Ukraine is responsible for it. But he was misguided. He was given a dream of joining NATO, and he was misguided, because he should have known the security concerns of Russia, and he should have known that Russia will never allow it. But the Western world, the US and all, misguided him and gave him a dream that they are going to stand and fight the war with Russia, and with their army along with the army of Ukraine will fight for him. He must have thought like that, which I don't think can ever happen. So that is what the ground realities are. Western world, US, President of Ukraine are responsible for precipitating this problem. It is not Russia. Russia has always been saying that they don't want NATO in Ukraine. That's why Belarus is with Russia. If Belarus tomorrow says that they want to join NATO, same will be the state there. Because you cannot, Russia will not allow NATO or the US missiles to be dotted along its border. So this is the reason why the conflict has taken place. Because the Western world instigated the current president, and the president of Ukraine has failed to see the history. The history of the US and the Western world is to create some or the other crisis anywhere in the world, because it serves their purpose, it serves their business. The business of the arms industry, business of the oil industry is served with the conflict anywhere in the continent or in the world. Iraq war was over. Afghanistan war was over in the August in last year. So there was no conflict taking place, major conflict where US and the Western world arms companies can make money. So they have to create a market, and Russia knows this, and the president of Ukraine became a puppet in the hands of the US and the Western world in this direction. So there is a conflict where the Western world is going to make money. So the Ukrainian president has to realize this. He has to see the history. Wherever you see USA has gone, they have created a problem there for their interest, for their benefit. Pandemic was another example of this. In pandemic, the arms company and the oil companies cannot make money because it's not a war, but it was a biological warfare. Did anybody sanction? Did anybody try to find out who has unleashed this and who is responsible for it, so that that person can be held responsible? Nobody did anything on that front. But there was no money to be made for doing that. There was no money for arms or oil companies if you sanction or find out and sanction anybody. Here you have a market for your arms, the conflict in Ukraine. But on the contrary, the US and the Western world saw an opportunity for the pharmaceutical companies to make money, so that the pandemic was continued. That is why the pandemic continued, because of that reason. But it was a pharmaceutical market for the American and Western world companies to make money, and they are still making money. That is why the vaccines of the other countries were either some narrative was peddled ki they are not effective, like for Russia and China is medicine, and for vaccines of India it was a long drawn process to get the approval of WHO. So this is the way the policy and the narrative and the game is played by the Western world. But the president of Ukraine failed to realize it. He should have known it. He is the president of a country. He should understand that better, how the game is being played by the Western world, and he has become a puppet in their hands. So that is the reason why this conflict has taken place. And sympathies are always with the person who is aggrieved or who has suffered. But this accident has been created by both Russia and Ukraine. So how can Russia be a monster and Ukraine be a holy cow? It cannot be. Both are equally responsible. Neither of them are monsters, neither of them are holy cows. That is my perspective on it. I'll give you a small example. Suppose you have an accident between a cyclist and a truck. Sympathies will always lie with the cyclist, no matter how much wrong that cyclist was in creating that accident. Sympathies will always remain with the cyclist. Same is the case here. Sympathies are all with Ukraine because they are cyclists and Russia is a truck. So nobody will have sympathy for the truck driver. They will have always this sympathy for the cyclist. And as such, the Western media, the way the things have been projected, Ukraine president has been made into a hero. He is getting carried away by that image. He should realize his foolishness to carry on with this conflict, because he is not suffering directly, but his country is suffering. He is the president of that country. He should realize it. Every day of conflict is putting his country behind by years in terms of economy and in terms of infrastructure. Last 13 to 14 days of conflict has already put Ukraine economy as well as the infrastructure behind by more than 50-60 years. This is what the president wants to do for his country. He should have known the security concerns of Russia, and he should have known the credibility of the Western world and USA to stand by him in his country joining NATO, and he should have accordingly briefed his people. He is the president, he has to talk to people, not get carried away and build a image, false image which the Western world is making him a hero. But he should realize he is not a hero, he is making his country suffer, his people suffer. They are getting carried away by his emotion and his speeches. Will the Western world come and build up his infrastructure? Let me see. But they are ready to give him arms because that serves their purpose. It gives a market for the Western world companies, arms companies to make money. That's why they are ready to give him arms. He should realize Russia will never allow him to be part of NATO. How can Russia allow that? So he should realize now. Now what is the way out? Way out is simple. He should stop this war. It is more courageous to stop this conflict than to stand and get carried away by the hero image which the Western social media is building for him, because the social media as such is the world over is controlled by the American companies, whether it is WhatsApp, whether it is Facebook, whether it is Twitter. So don't get carried away by that hero's image. He should become a hero by stopping this war. Courage is not in continuing with this conflict. I feel the courage is in stopping this conflict. That is courage, because he will do a favor to his countrymen and his country infrastructure by doing that. You can always build your country, become strong, and do things the way you want in a better way, rather than getting carried away by the Western world's promises and land as a puppet in their hands and gain nothing out of it. So courage is in accepting what is the situation and stopping this conflict. That is the way out as of now. There are 4 demands. Those 4 demands are already existing. He need not agree to it at all. It's just that he has to say so. The 4 demands are: his military should stop. These are the 4 demands of Russia. Military should stop operation, that is Ukrainian military. They should create a provision in their constitution that they will be neutral and they will not join any group like NATO. Third is accepting Crimea as part of Russia, which is already there. And fourth is that the provinces or the states are there's 2 eastern side, there are 2 republics which are independent, or they are striving for independence from Ukraine, that is Donetsk and Luhansk. And then, yes, sir, they are independent, they are fighting against him, so they are already independent and Russia has already recognized them. There is nothing more he has to do. He has to be just wise and should have the wisdom of not getting carried away by the Western world and America and the promises they made for him, which would have never been fulfilled as such. And the other part is that these world problems can only be solved if the organization called UN, which is the most ineffective, inefficient and worthless organization, has to be overhauled. They are the people, or that is the organization which should be taking charge of such kind of problems between countries. That is what it was meant for, not to just talk and do nothing and get dictated by 5 countries which are so-called permanent members having veto powers. UN is basically, as of now, an organization which is totally undemocratic. The US and the Western world talk about democracy and democratic principles and democratic doctrines and all, but this is the most undemocratic organization of the world. How can you have 5 permanent members and they wield veto power and they control the policies of the UN? You cannot have permanent members with veto powers. All members, if there are 200 countries in the UN, they all should have single vote. No permanent member, no veto power. Matters be discussed and voted and majority prevails. That is a democratic setup. That is what it should be. Otherwise, this world will keep facing the problems like Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and there is no solution because the UN body itself is ineffective and inefficient. That is where the problem and the solution lies. So this was my perspective on this Ukraine and Russia conflict. Western narrative is completely biased. We should not get carried away by that. They peddle the narrative which suits them. We should be wise enough and we should have the wisdom enough to understand that. The sad part is Indian media itself is peddling the Western narrative, which is, I feel, very sad that the Indian media is not pragmatic and not wise enough to know what the biased narrative of Western world is. The Indian media needs to be more wise and more mature on this front. So I hope the Russian and Ukrainian conflict ends soon and the Ukrainian president wakes up to the reality. He he should wake up and do something better for his country rather than getting carried away by the hero's image which the Western world is generating for him and instigating him to do further harm to his country rather than doing good to his country. So let's all wake up and not get carried away by the narrative of the Western world medias.